Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning, we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Halee Gray Scott, Ph.D. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Scott.
Thanks for having me.
In other words, hi, Halee.
Hi. Yeah, I like Halee because my father-in-law is actually Dr. Scott, was Dr.
Oh,
Scott
really?
before me. So yeah, and I've never hyphenated my name, but I always put Gray Scott as my last name.
Oh, it's okay. So I should have said Dr. Gray Scott.
I don't know, but that sounds clunky. So who knows?
That's all right. That's good to know. Well, Halee, you run the Christian Curious podcast and radio program. Congratulations. It's now syndicated on the radio as far as I hear. Yeah. Cool.
It is. It's syndicated in Northern California. I think it reaches all over California and upwards a little bit into Oregon. And then we have the Mountain West and then
cool.
Also Dallas.
Oh, okay, cool. And what radio station is it on? Do you happen to know in LA?
I don't have that right in front of me. Let's see. It's on K-Bright.
K-Bright?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll look it up. What's your website called?
It's www.christiancurious.com.
Okay. Christian Curious. Now, I guess we got to get this out of the way. The first one is, are you a Christian?
I am a Christian.
Okay.
I'm
going to have to fire my virtual assistant because she had Muslim down here. Hold on a sec. So Halee is not a Muslim.
No, I'm not a Muslim.
Okay. Nothing against being a Muslim.
Right.
But okay, that makes actually a lot more sense with your podcast. Okay, because I was curious about that. Okay, Christian, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. What's the story behind Christian Curious? So you, first of all, you are a Christian. My guess is you're probably curious too. How'd you come up with that name?
Well, it started with, I started doing radio when I was 15 years old. And so when I was hired to come alongside as the Young Adults Initiative Director, which is a research project funded by the Lilly Endowment to come alongside congregations to figure out how to engage young adults, into the church, because they are the most likely to declare themselves as nuns. And so in order to get as many applications as possible, as a researcher, I wanted a broad field of applicants. So I went on radio stations and then continually throughout the program and over the years, I was asked back to give updates. And I really wanted to democratize information, because sometimes when you're doing research projects, you actually don't get the information until years later, and radio was my instant availability to do that. And eventually they offered me my own radio show. And
how old were you when you got your own radio show?
I was 42.
Oh, okay. You said you've been on the radio since you were 15, right?
Yes, but so that was my natural. Whenever I got this job, I already had that mindset of a journalism. So
gotcha.
I went into radio.
Okay, cool. Sorry for asking your age.
No, I'm 44. I'm not ashamed. Well, we'll have to think about what that means. What does ashamed mean, or what is like?
What does 44 mean?
What is 44
starting from conception or birth?
From birth.
Okay, there you go. We might have to talk about that, Halee.
Okay.
You might have actually existed before birth.
Well, that's true. Yes, I did. 9 months.
Anyway, but that's quite so. 15 years old. How did you? What's the story behind that? You got on the radio at 15?
I did. I was.
What state was this?
Texas.
Okay. All my exes live in
Texas.
Arkansas, which is the next state over.
Yeah. Well, I was always really interested in writing. I got into writing. It was my way of dealing with a dysfunctional family.
Okay.
My mom was had been in rehab. My parents divorced. And so I was a writer. And so I started, as a sophomore year, my writing really took off. I got on the school paper, and then I started doing string reporting for the local paper. And then I decided I wanted to do radio. So I applied to actually read police reports. So I would come in at night and I would read police reports and read the news stories and things like that. So, getting on air has always really been, appealing to me.
Writing was a process for you?
Yeah, it was my way to process.
There was some pain at home.
Oh, definitely.
Do you have a big family? Brothers, sisters?
I have a biological brother who's 4 years younger than me. And then I have an adopted brother. My dad and my stepmom adopted a child when I was 18. So I have an 18-year-old a brother that's 18 years younger than me. So.
Okay. And you have a biological brother who's, tell me again how he's related, older or younger?
He's 4 years younger than me.
4 years younger. Okay. All right. What part of Texas did you grow up in?
I grew up in a little town about 40 miles north of Tyler, Texas, and 80 miles east of Dallas, in the middle of the woods.
Cool.
I actually live 5 miles outside of a town of 1,400 people. So I grew up in serious country.
Yeah.
And, today it still remains, it looks the same. So that's kind of refreshing given how much, here in Colorado, everything changes every single day. More houses come up, but out there it kind of stays the same.
Oh, so it's serious country. It's so serious you didn't even tell us the name of the town.
Quitman, Texas.
How do you spell it?
Quitman. Like quit, man.
Oh, wow.
Sissy Spacek grew up there.
Huh. I think I can hear a similar accent now that I think about it with her. But I mean, it's not like I've really studied it or anything. Okay, well, so
Matthew McConaughey.
Oh yeah.
Was from Longview, which was 40 miles away.
No kidding.
So every time I hear Matthew McConaughey talk, I get a little homesick.
Wow. Was there animals around when you grew up? Rattlesnakes, owls? Please say owls. Please say owls. Did I say that? Oh, sorry. Deer, raccoons, possums.
All of it. We did go fishing. Okay. My grandfather made me gut a fish one time. That was the first and the last time I ever did that. My dad, we live on a piece of property where my dad, it's a stretch of several acres, and my dad has a house, and then his sister has a house, and then in between is a little bitty house they built for my grandmother, who's turning 90 this year. And so we all live on that property. And growing up, my cousins who lived on the same property as I did, they were involved raising cattle. And I got and then next door was the ag teacher for the high school. And so he had a lot of animals. And so every morning I'd go out, I'd see the cows, I'd see goats and sheep and, all kinds of animals. And I really got fond of them. And so there was one time where I asked my family at a barbecue, I said, so where's Daisy at? What happened to Daisy? And they said, she's on your plate. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
I'm like, no. And so from then
Oh
on,
my gosh.
I've not had beef.
Oh, wow.
I quit beef. That almost eliminates me as a Texan, but
wow.
I'm just like, how can I eat Daisy? I can't eat Daisy.
You had an emotional attachment to this animal?
I did. Well, I had emotional attachment to all of them. I was constantly there was a really bad habit.
What was it, a dairy cow, or what was it?
No, it was a cow raised for the beef.
Okay, so it was cattle.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it just like one cattle? I don't know what the singular of cattle is. I guess it's cow, because it depends on if it's a bull or a female or a bull. But so was it just one that you had, and that you named it?
No,
Daisy?
they had a ton of them, and
were they all named Daisy?
No, they weren't all named Daisy.
Well, how did you know which one was which that was missing?
Because I particularly like this one. I would go over and visit her just across the fence. There was like
tell who it was. How could you tell the difference? Is it color?
The coloring of the cow is different.
Gotcha. Okay. So as soon as you name the animal, you can't eat it, basically.
Well, some people can.
I think that's the rule. Oh, wow.
My cousins would name them and then eat them, so they have no problem with that.
Yeah, I relate to you. I think that would be tough. I think that'd be tough. We had chickens growing up. Do I want to say this story? I don't know. I'll say it really quick. We had chickens growing up in a little town called Littleton, Colorado.
Oh yeah, I think I know that town.
It's kind of a hick suburb town. A bunch of hicks. Anyway, we had chickens, and we had this attachment to them. We got them for Easter. They were like an Easter kind of a thing. We raised them from chicks. Each one of the 4 kids got one. My parents, I don't know why they had this crazy idea that they were going to one day kill them and eat them. And we were just all of a sudden going to act like farmers all of a sudden. But my brother couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
I don't think he could handle it. He was a mess. He was crying. He was a little boy, and it was in the garage, and we're like, hanging it upside down, and the blood's draining out. And it's just like, it was so, yeah. My parents didn't think that one through very well, because it wasn't a normal thing, right? I mean, it wasn't like, it was like these were pets, and you don't just randomly kill your pet and eat it when there's no starvation happening. I mean, got it. There's like World War V happening. Okay, got it. But this was just another day in Littleton, right? So the grocery stores were open, and we didn't have any problem eating meat. It's not like, but it's the naming issue. As soon as you name it, especially for kids. So I relate. I'm not going to belabor that story. I'm sorry. Daisy got killed. What a traumatic way to find out your favorite cow got killed. So you're just looking at this pile of beef on your plate.
Yes, and I was like, nope. So I haven't had beef, except for I was pregnant with my first daughter. She's 13 now. I decided, I need a hamburger, instead of going to like In-N-Out and getting like, and I hadn't had beef in 20 years. And so instead of going to In-N-Out and getting like a thin one, I went to Claim Jumpers and got the big, massive burger. And I was so sick. And so I haven't had beef since.
Wow.
And my 13-year-old is vegetarian too now.
So you're vegetarian? Is that how you
I'm pescatarian.
Pescatarian? Okay.
So I'm mostly vegetarian, but occasionally I feel like I need, as I get older, I feel like I need that extra boost of protein. But I was completely vegetarian for about 15 years.
What's a pescatarian again?
It's where you only eat fish.
Only fish okay. So you're not naming the fish, right? Do you have fish pets?
No. Oh, yes, we do, but I don't name them.
Ah,
I wouldn't
you
eat them.
learned. You learned. It's hard. Yeah. With animals. What's your philosophy of animals? You must have some kind of feeling about animal rights or feeling about how God feels about it.
I do. And this is where my husband and I totally disagree. But, if you look in Genesis 6, you think of the word dominion, and the word dominion in Hebrew actually is more like the word stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
And in Genesis, before the fall, it says God gave every seed bearing plant for, humans to eat. And so it wasn't until the flood when God said, you can eat meat. And it's not like he enthusiastically says, I am blessing you with the ability to eat meat. He's kind of like, you're going to do it anyway. So I'm going to make the animals afraid of you. And so it's sort of like a concession. And so I think that, the bottom line is if I can possibly live without meat, then I ought to do so. Because, I asked my husband this question, will there be meat in heaven? And if there is no death in heaven, how could there be meat in heaven? And so I'm trying to live into kingdom living by practicing, a mainly vegetarian diet. But I do believe in, stewarding the earth, stewarding animals. I'm pretty middle of the road. I don't try to get, all into the far left views on animal rights and environmental rights. And I definitely don't go into the far right where, you're going off into, African safaris and just killing for fun. So, which is what some, seminary presidents have done.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
There is one former president of a seminary where you would go into his office and his whole office was decorated in animals he had killed on African safaris, including an ape. And he had that, or a monkey, and that monkey was stuffed sitting on a shelf holding Darwin's Origin of Species.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Is it? You don't have to give the name of the seminary, just the address, just the mailing address.
Fort Worth, Texas.
Oh, gee, I wonder which one it was. That's going to be hard to figure out. Well, that's interesting. How did you come across? Were you in that office yourself? You saw it yourself, or you saw a picture of it?
I had friends that had gone in there, and then I actually interviewed him on one occasion and we discussed it. But I was very professional. I just asked him about it. It was in the context of asking his opinion about women as well. So
you were Christian and you were curious.
I was Christian and I was curious. I've always been curious. I mean, growing up, my dad would say, oh my gosh, Halee, you ask so many questions. Oh my gosh, Halee. He never said you asked too many questions. He just said you ask a lot of questions. And then he would say, you think
Did he say it like it was a bad thing?
No.
Oh,
he would just be like, I don't know how to answer that question. And so, yeah.
Wow. So you were there in this office asking about women too?
I was interviewing him. I did a research.
What were you standing and sitting underneath the ibex or something?
No, I did this over the phone. I wasn't there.
Oh, it's on the phone. Okay. I gotcha. Sorry, I missed that part. So you didn't have to actually look at the animals.
No, you were asking. I probably wouldn't have been able to complete the interview.
Oh my gosh. You're like, okay, I came here to ask about women and ministry. What the hell is up with the ape? Seriously? Really?
And the leopard on the ground. Oh my gosh.
It's odd. It is kind of odd, I think.
It is odd.
I mean, I grew up hunting. fishing, you know. The view I have about hunting though is a lot like the guy that has the show on Netflix. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. It's called Meat Eater. You ever
No,
watch it?
no.
It's about a guy. He's a hunter. He's very philosophical. He walks you through his thoughts about it.
Yeah.
He's thought through it. You don't waste anything. You shouldn't waste anything. It should be for consumption. You should think about it, what you're doing, why you're doing it. It's and have respect for the animal. It sounds a little odd to say it that way, but that's how the Indians thought about it. I have
Right.
a
That's what
very
I was
Indian
thinking.
view about it. Yeah. I,
Honoring the sacrifice and honoring, hey, they've given their
yeah.
life to help me survive.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, now that I brought up Indians, they did use the animals for other than consumption.
Right.
They did use them for some things that might sound similar to what this seminary president had, like pride, or I mean that's probably the wrong word, but something like some other social role than just getting food, right? Or just having like a blanket in the cold. Like for example, eagle feathers.
Mm-hmm.
Eagle feathers are still used. They're clearly not consuming the eagle. They're using the feathers. They're beautiful.
Right.
The skin of the animal's beautiful. The fox or whatever, it's the beaver pelt, whatever. It's functional. It's beautiful. But the eagle feathers, for example, I mean, it's a symbol of rank, for example, and that symbolizes fierceness in battle, which is pride.
Yeah.
It's not fierceness in battle over animals necessarily, although I guess they would be proud of that if they killed a bear or something. They'd probably wear the teeth or whatever, or the not the teeth, the claws, but different tribes had different practices. I'm actually reading a book called Indians of Texas. So I'm on the
Oh,
part of
really?
East Texas. I'm on the East Texas Indians. It's very interesting. It includes prehistoric stuff.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
the prehistoric stuff is really interesting because we it's hard. I don't know how people know anything about it. There's no records left. So it seems like it's pretty there's a lot of guessing about how certain tribes came about and which tribes mixed with other tribes and which tribes forced other tribes out and stuff. It's pretty hairy stuff. But this
Oh,
guy in the seminary, I mean, like,
well, real quick, I was going to tell
yeah,
you that I'm ninth generation Texan,
ninth
and
generation. Jeez.
my ancestor was he was living maybe it's close to Illinois or something like that, and he was commissioned by Santa Anna
Hmm.
to come down and try to make a settlement there in order to take control of the Comanche Indians.
Good
And
luck.
there is a story about him going through the East Texas woods, and he has the scouts in front. He's right behind the scouts, and then he's got his wagon with his family, including my ancestor, who was about 4 at the time.
Wow.
And then behind him had the cattle and the cattlemen. And so the Indians came through because East Texas is very densely forested. It's almost like jungle. You can't even see through
Right.
the trees. And they came out and they scalped the scouts. And while they were fighting the scouts, my ancestor, Goldsby Childers, he ran back to the wagon, hid his family in the woods, and then they had also attacked the cattle. But for some reason, they thought that the wagon was loaded with ammunition, so they didn't go any further. They just got the scouts and the cattlemen and some of the cattle, but they left the wagon alone. But he received land from Santa Ana down by close to Austin, I think. And he was there to try to develop a settlement there, and of, for
right.
Europeans, English.
Yeah.
And he lost 2 sons to Indians, but he would always try to like invite them over for dinner, and he would go over for dinner, but sometimes, they were in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting that you're reading about that. It's
fascinating to me. It's just fascinating to me. I mean, I just try to take it in and try to take in. I'm constantly, when I have the energy and time to do it, poking into different chapter. I've tried to read it all the way through. I don't skip around, but I read the chapter on the Comanche. There's one on Apache too, and it gets kind of complicated because some of these tribes are so huge, and then there's tribes within the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's theories that anthropologists have put together about that, different phases. Like, for example, when they got horses, like horses changed everything.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh yeah, how did they do everything without horses? Like how do you hunt buffalo without horses? I mean, it's just fundamental change in Plains Indians. The ones that mastered the horse first, they were better in war.
Right.
Comanche they grew really a lot because they absorbed other tribes. They made war on the Indians that didn't move around, like the Pueblo. The Pueblo had horses first, I think, and the Pueblo. It's funny because if you're an Indian, you don't think in terms of forts. You don't think in terms of like that takes a lot of energy and time and thought and reflection. I mean, if you're just trying to survive, you probably don't have that. So,
right.
Those tribes would just get wiped out.
Yeah, you have to go where the food is.
And there's no record of it. And unless somebody happened to write it down and they heard it from somebody. How did you hear this story about your ancestor? Is that written down somewhere?
My uncle is really into genealogy. And so we've been able to trace back to this ancestor, Goldsby Childers. We've actually been able to trace back all the way to the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
But
rough stuff, man.
It is.
That's rough country back then too. Yeah, the lumber issue that you mentioned, lumber was the number 1 commodity of Texas before oil.
Wow.
And it's all because of East Texas. A lot of people don't know that, because if you go to West Texas, I'm familiar with West Texas because I lived there for a little while, and then when I was in the military.
And all you got to scrub.
Just out in the middle of nowhere. Holy cow. It's flat, tornadoes. Did you guys have tornadoes?
We did. Yeah. I mean, there were times when I would have to go, and I remember my mother's office had a vault, and we would go into the vault.
Oh, wow.
To ride out the tornadoes.
Yucky. Were you scared?
Oh yeah. I was constantly scared as a kid. I would lay awake at nights wondering, okay, how am I gonna, if a tornado came, what am I gonna do? Where would be the safest place to go?
You're thinking of that as a kid.
Yeah.
And you said you're constantly scared as a kid.
Right.
Was it just tornadoes?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You weren't scared of anything else?
Nothing
besides Daisy dying?
Besides Daisy dying, no. I mean, I don't remember having a lot of fear.
Were you scared of snakes?
I was, but not enough to keep me from stomping through the woods. I guess I kind of thought, well, they're never going to bother me. I mean, I never, I would get in my I would get on my bike and I would go explore the woods and the rivers and the streams. I actually swam in crocodile-infested ponds, and I never saw a crocodile. I never saw a snake. And so I guess I just kind of thought, well, they're not going to bother me. I just had this false sense of security that, oh, hey, they're not going to bother me.
So the sky is really the issue. The sky.
The tornado.
The tornado is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's interesting. Oh man, I don't know how you dealt with it. So that must have been cool though. I mean, as a kid having all that wilderness.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome to me.
Yeah, I mean, I often say that I'm homesick for a place that doesn't exist anymore. I can go back home and it's still the same. I took my kids to the creek that I used to play in, and where I would find these rocks, and in these small rocks, they'd be round and they'd be hollow, and you'd break them open and it would be full of colored sand. And this is what some Indians would use with water to mix together and use it as war paint or paint for their faces. And so I would go out there and I would, do that and play in the creeks and all of that. So, I'm able to take my kids there, but, I can still go back to my dad's house and, there's, cable TV, satellite TV, there's cell phones, there's internet. And so it's not as a quiet of a place of a world that it used to be. And so I often say that I'm homesick for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
I very much relate to that. I feel that all the time. Yeah. The summers there are pretty hot.
They are. Yeah.
What's that like? Are you playing outside still, even in the hot?
I would. Yeah. I mean, I might not now because I've lived, in Colorado and Michigan, but it's the humidity.
Yep. That's right.
So that's what's hard to deal with, is the humidity. But
and the bugs too. There's a lot of bugs, right?
There's a lot of bugs, and they like me because my blood type, I think, is attractive to mosquitoes. Yeah. But I never noticed it as a kid. I would still go outside and play.
There's something about the sound, though. You know what I'm talking about? The sound of summer, the bugs, the birds.
Right.
There is a sound to it. And
especially right at twilight.
Yes.
And if I'm sitting on my dad's back deck, I can look out into the neighboring property, and it's all jungle, and all in that jungle are, all kinds of insects and birds, and they're all singing their own song. And then the lightning bugs, the fireflies, have come back. For years, they were gone and nobody knew where they went. But the fireflies are lighting up the jungle, and it's just home. And I love that. I love that place.
That's awesome. So, Dr. Halee Gray Scott, why did you ever leave Texas?
I wanted to break out of a small town. Yeah. I didn't want to stay in a small town. I had spent my life, in the country reading books, and I had a very wide view of the world. And I wanted to see things. I'm curious. That's the name of my show.
Christian Curious.
I'm curious about the world. I wanted to experience different places. So, I moved to Dallas. I actually had a full scholarship to a school in Louisiana based on my writings. And I
Wow.
turned it down because I wanted to live in the city. And then I met a guy who grew up in LA, and his dad was a professor at Azusa Pacific. And we, a year after we married, we left for Los Angeles. I got my master's degree there. I got my PhD there. So I spent almost 10 years in Los Angeles and spent my 20s there. And I really appreciated that experience.
And are you married to that same guy now?
I am. 21 years.
That's awesome. You guys met in Dallas?
We did.
Okay. And so he dragged you out to LA.
That would be what my dad would tell you. Yes. My dad was not happy.
What went down in LA?
Nothing went down. I mean, I had to learn really quickly about safety. I mean, I had barely seen a fist fight in my whole life. I'd actually seen one fist fight. And that was when my boyfriend at the time beat up another guy during a basketball game because he had said something disrespectful about the wife of one of his friends. So he just beat him up. And that was the only fist fight I've ever seen. And my husband has been shot at. He lived through the Rodney King riots. He was left for dead by a gang during the Rose Parade.
This is your husband?
Yes. And so I had to learn really quickly, like all the rules, of Los Angeles, of like what streets not to go on. And it took him a while to even let me drive. I mean, that sounds very controlling, but he wanted me to be really safe. And
what did his dad teach at APU?
He was the chair of the theology and ethics department, and he taught primarily ethics.
So your husband has a dad who is conversant in the Christian tradition, ethics and stuff.
Yes.
Did that ever filter down to your husband? Does he know? Sorry to talk about your husband.
No problem. Sometimes, I mean, he is a therapist, sexual addiction, and he likes to integrate a lot of Christian theology and ethics into his practice, which, he has a different approach to helping men who struggle with sexual addiction than other practitioners because of his interest in, the works of like, Bonhoeffer, and mainly Bonhoeffer is like his really big inspiration. I'm sure he could tell you others, but I mostly hear him talk about Bonhoeffer. Oh, and Kierkegaard.
Okay. And you have a background, an academic background. You want to go into that? You have a PhD.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you have a bachelor's degree.
I do. I have a bachelor's degree in language and composition. I first started in literature, and then I thought maybe language and composition might be more useful to me. So I switched, and then so basically writing is my BA, and then my MA is it's in religion with a specialization in theology and ethics. And then I went and got a PhD in leadership and spiritual formation.
And are these all at the same institution?
No, I got my my BA at University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and then I got my MA at Azusa Pacific, and then I got my PhD at Biola, Talbot School of Theology.
I've heard of that school.
Yes.
I've heard some things about that school. That's in La Mirada, I think. La Mirada.
La Mirada.
Okay, gotcha. Well, UNT Denton. I think I've been on that campus. Oh, you know what? We had another guest on this podcast that does work on that campus, and we're trying to get one of the professors on. I believe that's the story. Anyway, yeah, we have a guy that does apologetics on that campus. We had him on. He works for Toyota. He's pretty high up in Toyota. I asked him what he did for Toyota. I said, well, first of all, Toyota, you mean the Toyota? He said, yeah, the Toyota. And I said, what was your job? And he said, advertising. And I said, okay, well, what? And he said, no, I was head of advertising. And I said, for Toyota. He said, yeah.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. He was on my podcast. So anyway, he's a Christian. So
well, UNT was really hard. I came into, when I was in college, I came in as an atheist, and then I became an agnostic. And I think if I had gone to a Christian school, I probably would have remained an atheist and agnostic, because I'm a contrarian. Wow. Mm-hmm. And
no, you're not.
So but at UNT I became a Christian, and when I became a Christian, oh my gosh, the hostility from professors was insane. I refused to do an assignment once. I had to read, the assignment was to read the most sexually explicit novel you could find, and then write about its portrayal of women. And then, so I refused to do it. And so they assigned me The Color Purple, which is just as, The Color Purple is a great book, but it's still not a great book.
It's got some rough parts in it.
It's got some really rough parts. So that were really rough for me at the time, because I was recovering myself from similar situations that are described in that book.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And we can go into that if you'd want. I've written about it, Washington Post.
Yeah, let's do that. Do you mind if really briefly before we get to that? You had brought it up, and I was going to get there. Was your background, your spiritual background growing up in Texas? I was curious about how you were seeing the world as a kid, like those summer nights, looking at the fireflies, stomping around in the woods, looking at Daisy on your plate. What kind of view of God did you have? What kind of the view of the Bible? Did you pray?
I did.
Did you have a community around you, a faith community?
I did not. It's kind of a sad story, but when I was a little girl, my grandmother called me the preacher, because I would always be citing scripture or telling some story about God. And I was just in love with Jesus, and I remember one time I was in the elementary school bathroom, and some girl hit me across the face for some reason or another. And I looked at her and I said, hey, hit me on this side. And she looked at me, because Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Let him hit that one too. And and she looked at me, and she was so confused, and she ran away from me because she was so confused by my reaction. But I loved Jesus. But then I went to a Southern Baptist church where I saw a lot of hypocrisy among leaders. And that hypocrisy really concerned me, because they describe themselves as appointed by God for that leadership position, and yet their lives were not consistent with the Jesus that I knew. And that really concerned me, even as young as 10 or whatever. And then when my parents got divorced, it was a small town. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody was up in everybody's business. And they did not excommunicate us from the church, but they ostracized us. And so, like, we would have people that would we would come in and sit down for the service, they would get up and move. And I felt so rejected, even in my youth group. It was similar, and I had nothing to do with my parents' divorce. Mm. And so my dad ended up getting custody of us because my mother was not capable of caring for us. And it was my mother who had taken us to church. And my dad, he was already tired of the hypocrisy. And so he never went to church. And so I was still believed in God all the way up until probably about, I was 19 years old when I started really doubting God. I was really angry with God more than anything, I think. And, I think that's why atheists are closer to God than agnostics, because atheism, you still have emotional connection. You have an emotional investment in the concept of God. Mm-hmm. But then when you're agnostic, you're like, well, apathetic, I don't know. And so right. It wasn't until I moved to agnosticism that I really moved away from the faith. But I was very religious all the way up until about 19.
Wow. That's very insightful. So you say you became a Christian at UNT Denton?
I did. I was waiting tables at Applebee's, and there was a hostess there, and she just radiated this joy. And one day I asked her, I said, Jody, how come you are always so joyful? And the second I said it, I wanted to reel it back in because I knew what was coming. And she said, it's Jesus, baby. And then she never stopped asking me to go to church. And so,
Now, were you a customer or were you working there?
I was working there. I was a waitress. I worked my way through college.
Mm-hmm. You're a waitress at Applebee's. You're working with this lady. What was her name?
Jody.
Jody? What was her social security number? Just kidding. Make sure we get the right Jody here. So this Jody lady, is she older than you?
No, she was younger.
Younger? Really? Wow. So this younger lady, she's radiating joy.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell it was real joy. It wasn't fake.
Right. I could see it.
How could you tell it was real?
I could just see it. I feel like, when I was very young, I had this prayer. I had read the story of Solomon and how when God asked Solomon, what do you want? And he said, I'd like wisdom.
Yeah.
And that pleased the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make God happy. And so one of my consistent prayers when I was a little kid was wisdom. And wow. I think he gave that to me, and I think he let me keep it.
Huh.
So that
unlike Solomon, because apparently he lost it somewhere. If you read that story.
I'm not as wise as Solomon was, but I could see God around her, and discernment is, I can still, I still had a level of discernment, even I knew where not to go, and when to avoid. There are certain situations where I probably I might not have even survived some situations because I was pretty wild, but
wow.
I just paid attention to, what I felt in my spirit was going on. And so when Jody came along, I saw God, I saw joy, I saw freedom, and I wanted that.
Do you keep in touch with Jody?
I do.
That's cool.
I actually have written about her in both of my books, I think.
Tell us about your books. What books do you have? We'll get to that Washington Post article.
The first one is Dare Mighty Things. It's about Christian women leaders. And then the second one I just finished is right now, I believe we're going to go with the title, Not a Hopeless Case. It's about having hope, the hope that young adults will come back to church, and the questions that they have for the church, and how they're going to navigate, how we can navigate the 21st century without the church becoming obsolete, like so many statistics say it's going to become.
What's the publisher of these books?
Zondervan.
That's a standard Christian publisher. We'll link those books up in the description of the episode. We'll also link your website, Christian Curious, and I'm going to have to get this Washington Post article. I've read it. I don't have it on me right now. I haven't looked at it in a while.
Yeah.
But I do remember reading it. Seems like it was a few years ago. When did that come out?
It came out during the Me Too year. I believe that. Have you heard of the Church 2 movement also?
Church 2? No.
Yeah. It's a story of women coming out being abused by pastors. And I was contacted by the editor of the Washington Post about an article I'd written years before about my story of being sexually assaulted by a pastor. And they ran it in the Washington Post, in print and online. That's how I actually got my Apple Watch. It came out during the Me Too year.
Okay. The original piece, where was that published?
Christianity Today.
Okay. So they republished something from Christianity Today.
Right.
Okay. Did you retain copyright, or did you give that to them?
I gave that to them.
They paid you for it?
They did.
Okay. Just interesting to know how that would. So Christianity Today didn't retain copyright?
No, they allowed publication as long as it ran in print. I don't know what the difference makes, but they couldn't run it just online. They had to run it in the print edition and the online edition. And it was one of the first stories, if not the first story, of a case of sexual harassment by a pastor.
Okay.
And then after that came the flood. And I did work. I ended up that year was pretty traumatic for me because I was constantly writing articles about sexual. Editors wanted me to write about cases in the media. And then I was also working with reporters on backstory. I was background information for a lot of stories on high profile Christian leaders, on cases they were breaking. And so it was part of my life for many months, for almost a year. And it was really like,
after Washington Post reprinted.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What year was the Christianity Today article published?
I don't even remember. It was ages ago, it feels like.
Was Carter president? Reagan?
No, I wasn't. Was I alive? Bush? I was alive during Carter.
I'm just going to keep going. Clinton.
It was
Bush 2. Obama.
It was Obama.
Obama was president.
Mm-hmm.
All right. At least we nailed it down somewhere. Okay. Well, if I can find that Washington Post, we'll link that. So you said it went in the print one too?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get a copy of that?
I did not.
Oh man, you got to get a copy of it. Maybe it's too traumatic. I don't know. It's kind of a big deal though. So you want to tell us what that article said?
Yeah,
Washington Post isn't going to sue you now, right? They're not going to sue you for copyright infringement.
No, I was I got sober. I'd been basically a pothead in college. I didn't drink, didn't do any other drugs. But I did smoke pot as a way of self-medicating my anxieties and insecurities. And I got sober on my 21st birthday. And I started going to church, threw myself heavily into it. And I was just really involved with the youth group and Bible study. And I was just on fire for God once again. And I was put on the leadership team for the youth group. And as I got to know the pastor, I started seeing some weird things. So I would drive from Denton to to the parsonage where he lived, which was midway between where we would the whole youth team would meet in Fort Worth. And I would leave my car there and I would ride. We would, ride together to the meeting, and he would play these tapes or these voicemail messages of these young teenage girls who would say, "Oh, I miss you so much," and da 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 da. And, just he played them so often. Almost every time that I saw him, he would play me these messages. Listen to how this girl misses me. And they were former girls in his youth group. And then I started noticing some weird behavior between him and two of the married women at the church that were mothers of kids in their youth group. And so one night we had gotten to the parsonage really late, like 2:00 in the morning. And he got a phone call from one of these women. And I knew that woman's husband was out of town. And he said, this is, so-and-so, I'm going over to her house. And then a week later, we were driving to another youth meeting, and I confronted him and I told him, because see, I had had a suspicion that he was having an affair with these women, but I felt like, oh, I'm the heathen pagan. He's the seminary student. I must be, putting myself on transference. I must be transferring my own ideas and my own mentality onto him. But eventually I came to realize, no, he's having an affair. And so on the way to the youth group meeting, I told him, I said, look, hey, dude, I know you're having an affair with these two women. And if you don't stop, I'm going to go to the senior pastor and to the board and let them know. So you better stop. And he denied it. And I'm like, there's no use denying it. I know. So don't even try to and so finally he said, oh yeah, they're both in love with me. I don't know how to get rid of them, but I'll get rid of them. And a week later, he shows up at my doorstep, my apartment in Denton. And I was alone watching a movie. And he said, well, this woman, one of the married women, keeps calling him, and he keeps coming by the parsonage, and he wanted to get away from her. So could he come in to my apartment to escape her for a while? And I let him in, and he raped me that night. And yeah, that was, and what's crazy is I think of myself as a fighter. And so if you think of if anybody would have asked me if something like that would have happened, would you fight? I would say, absolutely, I'd fight. I'd be punching the guy's brains out, but I didn't. I froze. Mm-hmm. And so back then, you didn't have the public discussion about the interactions between what happens to trauma victims during the middle of trauma as a freeze reaction.
Right.
You don't have a discussion about any of that. And so I all I could do is lay there and cry, honestly.
Yep.
And that's what I did. And he got up and left. And the next day he was on a whirlwind tour preaching on this circuit, but he was calling me 30 to 40 times a day. And I was just beside myself. And so eventually I did go to the head pastor and the board. He lost his job, got kicked out of seminary. He had to leave. He left the state of Texas, but now he's a lead pastor in Georgia because I didn't press charges. Because I couldn't. I mean,
Did you name him in the piece?
No, I've never named him.
Yeah.
But I do keep track of him.
Gotcha.
To see if other people raise issues, because he doesn't, a person doesn't just do that one time.
Right.
That's a habit.
Yeah.
And that is a personality. And
right.
so,
right.
That's probably been, the thing that I wish I would have brought charges, but I didn't. But it would have been it was traumatic enough.
Sure.
I mean, I couldn't even go through the doors of a church for years without having a panic attack. And I would try to talk to myself out of it. I would try to say, Halee, this is church. You're safe. But I couldn't talk my body out of it.
Right.
Yeah. And
involuntary.
The best thing, and you might know a little bit about this, but the best things that have helped me is reading stories of the PTSD from war vets and how they react to certain situations. Is exactly how I react to certain situations. Even today, I mean, the effect is muted a lot, and I have a lot more confidence in myself. And but I still, the enduring gift of being raped is you have with you forever a creep detector. So I can tell if a creep is around me. I can feel it. And so, yeah, that's always fun. But yeah, so that, and back then I thought I was the only one. And now I realize, whoa, I'm not the only one that has experienced abuse like this. And so it's been very helpful for me to think about how I can help other women move through the emotions of what it's like to be raped by a pastor or by a Christian leader. It's extremely difficult thing to deal with. It's, but I did marry a very good man. And at that juncture, I had a decision. I said, okay, I had been an atheist. I had only been a Christian for 3 months.
Wow.
When this happened. And I'd only returned to Christianity for 3 months. And so I had a decision. Do I still believe there is a good God as he is revealed through the Bible, or do I not believe in him? And what do I do at this point? And so I decided that I still believed in the God of the Bible. And so I said, okay, what do I do now? And so I said, well, I better orient my whole life so that I make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen to other people as far as is possible. And so that's why I ended up studying leadership and spiritual formation, as far as, how do you create healthy leaders? What do healthy leaders look like? And so that's been the enduring passion of my life, is to help the integrity of the church, to build it back, because we've lost a lot of credibility when it comes to, the behavior of Christians.
Yeah.
So that's a Washington.
There's so many layers to that. It's hard to know where to start, or even if one should start. But one, to say the obvious, is that the fact that it's a spiritual leader that you looked up to. Did you look up to him?
Yeah, I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a religious leader. He's a conduit to the spiritual life, Christ in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a conduit, a teacher about the true meaning of the world. God created the world, and that layer there, on top of just the pure raw physicality of the attack, which would be traumatic for if it was anybody, right? The attacker. The fact that it's a religious, spiritual conduit to God, that this guy is somebody you looked up to,
right,
is an additional layer to that harm. The word harm seems to even fall flat. It seems like it's such a deeper thing than just harm, but just the horror of that.
yeah.
And I don't know how you were able to pull it together after that. I totally understand why you didn't press charges. Totally get that. I mean, can imagine dealing with the police department and just the way that they are. I mean, love the police, but you got
The way they
forms to fill
interrogate.
out. Yeah, you got the forms to fill out. It's a criminal
Mm-hmm.
investigation. Those are notoriously difficult to prosecute because it's he said, she said. If there's no physical evidence, right?
Right.
And who's in the mindset of preserving physical evidence after something like that? You're not thinking like a lawyer. You're not thinking like a prosecutor, right? You're just a normal girl, young lady, and you're not. How long did it take you to tell somebody, and how did you actually get the courage to go to the board? I mean, I'm impressed with that, actually. How did you do that?
Well, he was calling me, 40 times a day, and he would say, oh, I'm so sorry. It's just, you were too beautiful, or whatever, something stupid. And so
Yeah.
that week, I went to one of the married women that he was having an affair with, who was my mentor. And I told her that I didn't tell her I was raped. In fact, when we went to the board together, and she confessed her infidelity. And I just said, this happened, and I take full responsibility for it, because he's not here to defend himself, because that was sort of my personality. It is, and I think it is much easier, at least for people like me, it's much easier to take responsibility for it than to actually admit that you were a victim.
Yeah.
And so it took me, when I went to the board, I was taking responsibility for it. And I was not telling the full story.
Wow.
And he still got fired, still got kicked out of seminary. And
well, hold on a sec. So you when you say you took responsibility for it, you mean you told them you were raped, right?
no,
Oh, you didn't tell them that.
I
Okay,
said
I misunderstood
there
you,
was
what you were saying.
intercourse.
I see. Okay, I gotcha. Okay,
But I didn't call it rape.
I gotcha. Okay.
I couldn't even say the word for 15 years.
Well, I'm no therapist, but I know that trauma, a key part of trauma is a feeling of helplessness.
And I hate the victim mentality.
Yeah. Well, taking responsibility is a way of gaining power.
Right. And that's what I was trying to do.
It's not a healthy way, but I can understand why you'd want to have some power back on that. And it did get you to say something about this guy. I can understand that.
But then 4 months later, I had been working at a ministry in Dallas, and a friend of mine had noticed, like my behaviors and, the PTSD tics that I had. And so she said, hey, let's go to dinner. And so we went to dinner, and we were at this table overlooking a lake. And she said, I want you to tell me what happened. And she is the only person I've ever told the details of exactly what happened. And when I finished, she said, Halee,
how long after was that you told this person?
4 months.
4 months. Okay.
And she said, Halee, what happened to you was rape. And if you don't call it that, you're never going to get better. And
tell me again who you told again. I mean, not maybe
it was a coworker.
Coworker. Wasn't Jody?
No, it was a person. I worked at a ministry where there were a lot of DTS students who were in counseling programs and things like that. And she's like, Halee, that's rape, and you're never going to be better. If you don't call it that, you're not calling it by what it is.
Wow.
And it still took me 15, and still I accepted in my heart that I was a victim. But it took me 15 years to say the word rape.
She said it, but you didn't say it. She said it. Okay.
Mm-mm.
You told her all the details. You didn't use the word, but she took those details and said, this is the word.
Right.
And it was too painful for you to use that term. Was it, would you say it was painful, or was it just make you feel powerless to say it?
I would think it would be both of those. But mostly it was just too painful.
Okay.
The word painful is not even the word. Yeah. I like your other word better. It was horrific. It was a horrific word to use.
Yeah. Horror. Yeah.
And back then people just didn't understand it like they do now, because the awareness wasn't there. And thank God we have the awareness now, but the awareness wasn't there back then. And so, I didn't.
Why do you think that was?
Well, we just didn't talk about rape, and that wasn't part of the national conversation. We had a lot of doubt on behalf of the victims. We had a lot of judgment on women, like, did they deserve it? Did they, what did they do? Did they not fight enough? Or, there's just so many levels of doubt that you have to push through as a rape victim, even today, but especially back then. But, now that we have moved through the Me Too year, I do believe that there is a raised awareness of the psychology of rape. And, in my article, I talk about the neurobiology of assault and what happens in your brain during assault, and how your brain processes it, and how, you never know exactly how you're going to react. I mean, you can't predict it until you're actually in that situation. Because I would have told you I was a fighter, but I didn't. I was so shocked and that I froze and just cried. And I said no, but I didn't like kick him in the, whatever. But
well, you were in a state of your nervous system state was probably freeze.
Right. I froze.
Freeze, yeah.
So yeah, that's
when it's fight or flight. Story. I learned this from Sarah Jackson, by the way, who's one of our colleagues. Actually, her name is Sarah Jackson Panther now. She's married now. She goes by Sarah Jackson Coaching on Instagram. She has I
think I know her. Is she a runner?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I know her.
We the way I know you is how I know her. We were writing colleagues together at a different nonprofit. Yeah, at a different nonprofit a while ago. I've known you for what, 10 years? Over something like that, over 10 years probably. Anyway, Sarah she's got this, she was chronically ill. It's a different issue. She went through PTSD in a different way with chronic invisible illness that was tried to get diagnosed for years and no one could figure out what it was. And it put her in bed for 6 years after she had been an athlete.
Right.
And
I remember
like a star athlete. Yeah.
Yeah. She would, it's her last name Panther is actually pretty apt because she runs fast. Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. I remember her running down the streets of Glendora and I was watching her thinking, wow, I can climb mountains and I can run marathons slow, but I can't do that. So
that's the same girl. She went to APU. Yeah. That's right. So anyway, she's got this toolkit called Restore, and it's about recovering the nervous system from whatever source of trauma. Of course, it doesn't replace therapy, psychotherapy. It does not replace spiritual community, friendship. Like you had a really good friend. But I just learned about the dorsal vagal shutdown and what fight or flight is, and kind of what you were saying about what happens during an assault. Like you went through the neurobiology of that. So she talks about that a lot. And so that's why I know it was a state of freeze. And I didn't know this until recently, where a state of freeze is fight or flight. Your body's creating all this energy, and that gets locked in the body as trauma. And that's why the body remembers, that book. And, there's but then freeze is when you're generating that energy, but you can't move.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's really hard on your nervous system. Sorry, just sharing a little bit of the stuff I've been learning recently, because I had similar kind of feelings of fight or flight, and on a low grade fight or flight, low grade stuff like that for years on the college campuses. And I had to figure out what the hell was going on with my nervous system. So yeah, this interesting stuff. I can totally get it. I mean, so I was going to ask you the Me Too movement. I think that was, what is that, 2018, 2017? I can't remember.
17, 18.
17, 18. Okay. Do you think that was a good thing, the Me Too movement then?
I think overall it was good. Of course, I'm always a person that likes to avoid extremes. I think it can go too far. And I think there were points where it went too far, but overall, I mean, it uncovered a lot of things that needed to be uncovered. And people are a lot more sensitive today about these issues, and women feel a lot more freedom to be open about their experiences. So they're not afraid to be disbelieved. They're not afraid, to speak out about, the things that have happened to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think of you as a very successful person. I think of you as, um, you went to grad school, you got your PhD, you've written some books, you're a successful writer. Um, you seem like you've had some healing from this. Would you say that's true?
Oh, yeah. I absolutely. And a lot of that's been,
How's the healing
through
take place?
My relationship with God, my relationship with my husband, who, I have a stable marriage. I have made choices that I've tried to make. I mean, it's not that my life is completely unaffected by it, because it is, but I have definitely been healed from it. I still have, like I said, the enduring mark is that creep detector. And so I can still get very uncomfortable around.
How often does that go off?
Maybe
in
just.
In other words, how many creeps are there around? I mean, is it all going off all the time?
Once every few months, maybe. I'm not really around a lot of, when there were a couple of pastors in the initiative that I ran that I thought, these guys are creeps. And I would even say to my students, because I'm so blunt, I had my research team and I'm like, these guys are creeps. And then my students were like, they're grad students, right? And they're thinking, oh my gosh, she is so, I don't know what to think about her. Why she's calling them creeps. And they were, the people that I called creeps were the people that ended up having to be in some form kicked out of the initiative because of sexual immorality. And then the students were like, oh my gosh, are you like psychic? You have been calling these guys the creep forever. And I'm like, yeah.
It's funny. Well, that's not funny, but it's funny. It's interesting. Wow. So it's a real thing.
It is. 1/4 of the churches in our study had a pastor who had some form of sexual immorality issue.
Where was that? Did you publish that study?
I wrote about it in the upcoming book that I have.
Tell us the name of that book again. The upcoming
one. Not a Hopeless Case.
Yeah.
And it's right now it's in my editor's hands, and he's going to give it back.
Is there a website for it yet?
Not yet.
Okay. All right.
It's still very, very young. I think it's hopefully going to be published early 2023, spring 2023. But it took me a long time to get there because I had 10,000 pages of data.
Wow.
That I had to go through by myself to, distill into a book.
Tell us about your writing process. You a morning person? You get up early? You have coffee?
I don't. I usually get up and take care of the kids. I'll read the news. Not the greatest plan.
What time do you get up? Do you mind?
No, I get up about 7.
Okay. Read the news?
I do.
You read a newspaper, like the actual newspaper?
No, not the newspaper, but online newspapers.
Well, I have to ask because you're joining us from, where are you joining us from, if you don't mind?
Littleton, Colorado.
My hometown.
Yes.
And so it's so funny.
To be specific.
That's funny. That's hilarious because, okay, well, the only little anecdote I was going to share was that, first of all, I love that area. It's home to me. Secondly, it's I had a newspaper route growing up.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And so I took great pride, okay, Halee, in making sure the paper got on the porch without hitting, and waking everybody up. Bam, in the snow too, every
Right.
day. So that's why I had to ask you if you read a newspaper, because I can picture where you're living, and that's the kind of area I was delivering the newspapers in.
Oh, that's so
Not
fun.
necessarily your street. It wasn't your street, I'm sure, but yeah, pretty close. So
Yeah,
so
Ken
yeah.
Carroll.
Yeah.
I live on the corner of Ken Carroll and Sims, right across from Chatfield High School.
Yeah, I know that high school pretty well. I've been in that high school before. My newspaper route was in Columbine Knolls. Do you know where that is?
Okay.
Columbine Knolls.
I've passed it. I know of it, but I haven't.
I believe that's the name of the neighborhood. I didn't really pay attention to that kind of stuff as a kid, but you don't think of neighborhoods have names. You just turn into a street. I think adults think that way, but as a kid, I don't remember thinking that way. But anyway, yeah, it's it's off of Wadsworth and Coal Mine. You turn in there. There's a Church of Christ on the street there.
Yes, I know that.
It's on a kind of on a hillish kind of a
right
thing.
Past the golf course.
So there's a Church of Christ that opens into that neighborhood. That's where I had my paper route. I had to drive into the paper route, and yeah. So
that's my walk and running route every day.
It's nice. Oh yeah, it's a great neighborhood. And your neighborhood too is well, there's a Safeway near you. There used to be a CJ's Coffee, and I did a lot of Greek studying when I was in Denver Seminary there, the Greek study. There's King Supers right there on that corner.
Yes.
King Supers. That CJ's Coffee is now, I believe, a nail salon. If you can believe that. It's right next to the Subway. There's a First Bank. There's a Subway. Right next to that was CJ's Coffees for a long time. Great coffee. And I'm not allowed to say the name of my wife on this podcast, but that's where we met, was at CJ's Coffee the first time.
Oh, cool.
She worked there. And so she went to Bear Creek, but I went to Chatfield, but her parents lived in Ken Carl. So it's kind of like, anyway, so it's kind of funny. I thought I would share that with you.
Yeah, I love this area. I do. It's beautiful.
Where do you shop for your groceries? You go to that King Supers?
I do go to that King Supers mostly.
I'll share another anecdote. I worked at King Supers when I was 16.
Did you?
Yep, but not that one. I worked at a different one. But yeah.
Well, now this is an up and coming area, but also, it's more and more violence coming over here. And I'm like, we left Los Angeles and now Los Angeles is coming to us. So, right over by Southwest Plaza, there was a shooting yesterday and a road rage incident. And so I'm like, oh my God. And people are breaking into cars constantly. And it's just a mess.
Is it drugs? They looking for a quick score for drugs, for cash?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Must be drugs.
It must be.
It's got to be there's some kind of thing that's behind that. That's sad. That's really sad. Even in Ken Carl, there's break-ins?
I haven't heard much about Ken Carl or my neighborhood
Ken
specifically.
Carl's kind of a swanky area for those of you listening who don't have any idea what we're talking about anymore. It's a nice area.
Yeah, it's right up by the hogbacks. And for those of you who don't know what the hogback is where when the Rocky Mountains were formed, that they pushed up plates of the earth that look like these little short mountains that have very sharp tops. So they kind of look like the back of a hog.
Yeah.
And so
it's the very first ridge in the Rocky Mountains. And you're nestled right there. And
right there.
I used to go with my buddy's senior year of high school, mainly junior, senior year. We would go up, and right as we were graduating high school that last year, go up on the hogback and watch the sun come up.
Oh, that'd be cool.
And we did it in winter. We love doing it in winter for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, because
We'd
the
like to torture
rattlesnake is terrible in the summer.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. That's definitely true. There's some big snakes. The biggest rattlesnake I ever saw was out there. But yeah. But yeah, we used to go up there, watch the sunrise, and bring some coffee up there, and we've got some pictures somewhere. I probably have them on Facebook somewhere. But yeah, it's a great area. The deer, we used to chase the deer on the golf course by
Oh yeah.
Chatfield. They don't want you riding your bike on the golf course, but did that stop me? No, didn't stop me. Just chasing those deer. It's faster than running. Doesn't seem to work. Yeah. So, man, you're really taking me back. Holy cow.
I run through the golf course sometimes too.
Yeah.
When I can get away with it.
It's fun. It's a nice area. We had a lot of fun times. See, you were talking about your Texas childhood. Well, that's my childhood right there. Running around, hanging, And then toward the end, when I joined the Navy at the Southwest Plaza.
Oh, did you?
Well, right across the street from Southwest Plaza is a strip mall. There's an Armed Force recruiting station there. It's still there. It's not in the same location, but it's in that same strip mall. That's where I joined the Navy when I was a senior in high school. And I think my sister worked in that Southwest Plaza for a while. But I remember I lived there before Southwest Plaza existed. When we first moved in there, I lived in the same house growing up. And that area was all horses. There was no Southwest Plaza. It was just horses.
Nice.
And then I remember when the big mall came in, it was the big talk, and then we saw Karate Kid come out in 1984 and Gremlins. I saw Gremlins in the movie theater there. I don't think they have a movie theater in Southwest Plaza anymore, but anyway, gosh, you're really taking me back, Halee. This is just going to be just me droning on about my sadness of how my childhood has gone. You like empirical research, you like data, you like statistics and stuff like that.
I do.
You're that kind of a person. Seems like a lot of work. You like survey research?
Survey research is not so difficult. Qualitative research is because you're gathering stories and you're finding themes in those stories, but it's much more engaging and it gives you much more nuanced detail than what you would just get through a survey. And that's one of the things that is missing, I think, in the Christian world is there's not a lot of Christian researchers. There's a few big guys that have the corner on the market, but there's not a lot of people who are trained on the PhD level to conduct research, on the church. So you might have therapists that go to Christian colleges that are trained in research, but they're going to be focused on neuroses and things like that.
Right.
They're not necessarily going to be looking at issues related to the church. And so
you'd say that's a description of what you do. You research the church.
I do.
Research the church. Okay. Do you have an institutional perch from which you can do this research? Or do you have any support? How do you do it?
I'm funded by the Lilly grant, by the Lilly endowment.
Is that enough to pay your bills, if you don't mind?
Oh yeah. I am, the grant is a substantial grant and it does, provide me a very comfortable salary. And I'm able to conduct research still. So, the first 5 years was a $1.5 million grant. The second 5 years has been 1.25 million. But then I had a rollover of about $250,000. So it's another 1.5 million basically that I have to continue the research for the next 5 years. And I'll be expanding from Denver to also Washington, D.C. And there are really 4 pillars to the research or to the project. That's the radio show and podcast, Christian Curious, trying to change Christian radio, and address some more questions in the Christian world than what you might typically find. So I will talk about issues like, I think in July, I'm not sure, I think it might be July, I'm talking about sexuality. So I'm addressing questions that young adults have, like, how is pornography bad for you? Why is it bad to have premarital sex?
Wow.
What kind of damage did the evangelical purity culture do? What does healthy sexuality look like? I've had Black Lives Matter people on my show. I've had, the kinds of topics that you don't traditionally hear on Christian radio. And also, as the director of the radio station told me, even though I feel very old at 44, he said, you're very young compared to everybody else on this station, on any of these radios stations, and you're also a female, which all the other females are in their 70s or their 80s. So it's very different. And my producer is a young adult. She's dyed hair, nose ring, kind of hip person. And so that's the main part, is trying to address the questions that young adults have about Christianity, and some of the big questions that we need to deal with in the 21st century if we are going to successfully navigate as a church. We need to adapt pretty quickly to the changing environment because the world is changing so fast. And so a lot of the money is going into that. And then the idea is that they're sponsoring, me, and then I will build, hopefully get more sponsors to come alongside and help me expand the reach of the program. And then, especially in the podcast area, the podcast is really where I think the growth can happen, because podcasts are so easily accessible. And then the second pillar that I've been working on is the research component, where I'm coming alongside, still exploring how churches are ministering to young adults, especially after the pandemic. So I'll be, working with churches in the Denver metro and in Washington, D.C., to see about the challenges and the struggles of both pastors and young adults. And
how'd you pick those 2 cities?
Denver Seminary is my launch pad for, that's who I got the Lilly Endowment through.
I've heard of that.
And I think you have. And so Denver Seminary, they have a campus here in Littleton, and they have a campus in Washington, D.C.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they do. They have a new campus in D.C. And so I'll be going out there and, flying periodically out there to do research, and I'll be hiring some staff out there. And then the third component is education, a two-way educational model, where I'm looking into innovative techniques for education, like maybe microcasts, which are short, either podcasts or short videos that instruct young adults in the matters of, leadership, spiritual formation, Bible, theology, and life skills. And also there has been a need, expressed to me from, Christian leaders that they want education as well as what is happening on the ground, because, the realities of what is happening in our country, in our world, are changing so fast that in order for them to stay on top, being good leaders, being good professors, being good educators, they need to know what the people are going to actually be dealing with when they go out and do ministry. So
yeah,
that two-way educational model is the third pillar. And then the fourth pillar is collaboration, trying to help build communities of collaboration between churches, rather than moving from a competition model that was pretty dominant in the 1990s, 1980s, to a collaborative idea where, we're a united body. That was one of the prayer of Christ is, we are one, right. We are one. I prayed to God that they are one. They will know that you're from me by the love that you have for one another. I mean, there's so much indication that the heart of Christ was set on unity. And if we can demonstrate that unity, that is actually a really compelling witness for people who are non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I'll be working on for the next 4 years.
How long did it take you to write all that up and present it to Lily? How did you figure out how to do that? Did you have the grant writing skills from birth, or how did
I actually don't. I could not write the grant. It's funny because the Lilly Foundation said, I described to them my vision, which is what I just described to you, what I wanted to do.
Is this through email or just cold call them from like a payphone?
No,
outside of
no,
King
I had
Soopers?
already had a relationship with the Lilly people from the first grant, and they actually informed Denver Seminary, can you please help Halee write a grant? Because she's got great ideas, but she doesn't know how to write a grant. So
how did you get the first one though? How did you get that initial?
They got, someone else wrote the grant for the first grant, and I was hired. And when I was hired, they said, here's $1.5 million, go build something. And so
does that go into your bank account, or how does that work?
No, it goes into the Denver Seminary keeps it. And, I have a card.
You trust Denver Seminary to keep 1.5 million for you?
Well, it's not my money anyway. So, but
don't you think that Don Payne would probably go over there with his the ATM card, just grab a 20 really quick?
He might.
For some Subway.
He's my boss.
Oh, is it right? I didn't know that. He was one of my professors.
He's my boss. He's the one I report to. He's the
That's so funny. I had no idea that he was your boss. He was like the first guy I thought of from Denver Seminary. His deep voice. His deep voice. Yeah, he was my teaching practicum professor, spiritual formation professor.
Yeah, he's from West Texas, so his accent is different than mine.
Right. That's right.
But only a little bit, because my parents are from West Texas. Anyway.
Well, that's cool. My first connection with Denver Seminary is I was in high school. I had a mentor who was a philosophy professor at Denver Seminary for over 40 years, Dr. Gordon R. Lewis. And he retired in 1993 when I graduated from high school. And some young whippersnapper named Doug Grotice, no one could figure out how to say his last name back then, but he came and took his place. But the guy he took his place, he was my mentor, Dr. Gordon R. Lewis.
And Grotice is a buddy of mine, and he has been on my show quite a lot.
Oh, cool.
Because we have a lot of fun discussing philosophical.
You see which book I'm using, right? For this.
Oh my gosh, I thought it looked familiar. Yeah,
he just sent it to me.
We really just did a show on
Bless
that.
his heart. Oh, yeah, cool. That's awesome. Well, I'm really happy to hear that. That's so you have this interest in kids, and you're also you're hanging out with philosophers. How does that work? You're like an empirical researcher and you're hanging out with philosophers. Do you think that philosophers have something to say or help with these kids?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and I do get a lot of good responses when he's on the show. And
that's good.
In fact, I just had a young adult contact me and say, gosh, I love it when you interview Dr. Grotice because he's got so much knowledge and you pick his brain so well and your conversations are so fun. And
I'm going to have to listen to those. I missed those somehow.
So yeah, he's been on the show quite a bit. And yeah, we have a lot of fun discussing, technology. I mean, he's like really the only one I can talk about technology and the human soul with.
Oh, wow.
Because
he was writing about that back in the 90s.
He was. Yeah.
Yeah. And Soul in Cyberspace is his book. Soul
and now
I remember when that came out, I was like, I have no idea what this book is about.
But now it's just like,
yeah.
Because, people are trying to upload their consciousness to clouds and all kinds of stuff. And yeah. And then what does the soul mean in the metaverse? We did a show on the soul in the metaverse.
Wow. What a great idea. You are incredibly curious. Has your curiosity waned with time? Has it waned with trauma?
It's not.
Has your curiosity helped you heal from trauma?
I've never thought about that, but probably because I'm always looking for answers. I'm always looking for ways to I don't know if it's curiosity or my deviant behavior, because I can always find
contextualize that for
a way out of something. I can usually find
contextualize that for us, just so people don't misunderstand what you mean by deviant behavior.
Oh yes.
Just to clarify what
rebellious. You mean. So for example,
walk down the abstraction ladder. Give us an example of what you mean. Do you mean
the funniest example that I can think of? As a teenager, everything was long distance because I lived in the country and I had my own telephone line because my mom worked for the telephone company, and I ran up a phone bill of $200. And so my uncle, who also worked for the telephone company, came in and secretly, they put in a timer on my phone so it would shut off at like 10 o'clock at night. Well, I was talking to my friends at 10 o'clock at night and it shut off. And instead of asking my dad about it, I found the timer hidden in some obscure place in the garage and I turned it off. And then I continued to figure that out. Because I'm determined and
you followed the phone line. That's what you did.
No, I didn't. There was no line. It was just, I don't know how they did it, but I just turned off the timer. And then my dad, it took a month, of course, before he got the bill to figure out that I had turned off the timer. So then he moved the timer and I still found it again. And then, so that's an example of sort of my rebellious.
I gotcha.
And then also
So you're not stealing cars. You're not blowing. You didn't blow up the garage. You just.
No. And I would take my daughter when she was 2 to feed the ducks. And I could tell that she was a rule follower, pretty young. And I have this picture, one of my favorite pictures of her as a toddler. She's standing with a hunk of bread and all of these ducks are around her. And then way behind her is this sign that says, "Do not feed the ducks." And so
that's a good example.
That's the kind of rebellious, devious behavior. So you're always looking for like a way around the rules.
These unspoken rules.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you're making progress, that your work is going to make a difference and make the church healthier, which is your goal, right?
Yes, I hope so. Ultimately that's not up to me. I mean, that's up to God and,
Are
the
you a
people.
Calvinist?
I am not a Calvinist.
Okay. When you say it's up to God, what do you mean by that?
Well, I do believe that he is powerful, all powerful and mighty, but I don't believe that I believe that he can, if people turn to him, that he will work and he can bring about sorts of revivals and things like that. And he has the power to act in any way that he wishes. I just don't believe that he treats us like puppets.
Yeah. Wow. What's your position at Denver Seminary, if you don't mind my asking? What's your title?
I am called the creative director of the Young Adult Initiative.
Cool. You're doing important work. You're an interesting person. We've covered so much in 2 hours. Some of it was pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, it was intense. It's hard to know after you shared that one story about the Washington Post story, where to go from that. Like I have to confess, I was like, but I thought it was just a lovely time for me getting to know you more and better and just spending time with you and
thank you.
Seeing who this person is that's doing this research. Folks who are listening, she's really dedicated person here doing this kind of research. The statistics on young involvement with church and what their beliefs are and what's there to support them is quite scary to me, in my mind, because what's going to replace it? What's going to replace a healthy church? Nihilism, with some kind of version of worship of government or leftist harmful statism or something like that. So we need thoughtful people like Halee, I think, leading the charge. How can people support you, pray for you, reach out to you?
You can find me on my website at www.christiancurious.com. And I would say just pray that, the Lord, for my own, I would say the biggest prayer that I have is that I would continue to grow in my relationship with God in order that I may be able to discern the paths that he wants me to follow and not go down any path that might be a distraction or something from, what he wants me to do.
You're daring mighty things, aren't you?
I'm trying to. I love Teddy Roosevelt. That's a Teddy Roosevelt quote.
What's that book about, really quick? Dare mighty things?
Female leaders. Female Christian leaders.
How'd you get that idea for that book?
I was just reading something I was reading something by Teddy Roosevelt. He says, I don't know the full quote by itself, but it's about, don't fear the people in the stands that are critiquing you, basically, be the person in the arena, and, far better it is to dare mighty things than it is to be someone that is just in the audience critiquing.
How old are you when you read that quote for the first time?
I was probably in my 20s.
You're just randomly reading Teddy Roosevelt in your 20s?
Yes.
He hunted big game in
Africa
to bring this full circle.
I know he did, but he also established the national parks.
That's true. He was thoughtful. He was a thoughtful guy.
Well, he lost his mom and his wife on the same day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
and
right. He knew trauma.
He did.
He knew heartache. That's right. He was a very interesting man. That's for sure. I had a guy on the podcast a couple of weeks ago that wrote his doctoral dissertation on Teddy Roosevelt. We talked about that on the podcast. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, taught at the Air Force Academy. Yeah, that's a. So you were reading TR. We call him TR in the political science world. TR, is that's to distinguish him from FDR. So, which is his sixth cousin, I think. Well, is there anything else you wanted to mention or talk about?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I wanted to have a relaxed pace and enjoy our time together. I certainly did. I'm encouraged. I think that's the word I'm looking for, is I'm encouraged after talking to you for 2 hours, because I've seen what you've gone through, and I see who you're hanging out with over there, and I can actually hear their voices, and I can smell them. Well, actually, I think Dawn wears deodorant now, so that might be a little different now for you than it was when I was going through. But and just a delightful person, and I love the idea of what you're doing, the work you're doing. I'm just incredibly impressed that you have this Lilly endowment, that you're so methodological in your curiosity, and you're taking what God gave you as your curiosity, which I relate to because I'm very curious too. And that you're using that to breathe life and bring healing to our culture.
Yeah. Well, we
all owe you a debt of gratitude.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, Halee. We'll take care.
Take care. God bless.